I love it. Okay, we're recording, and
Yeah.
Armando Iannucci, what brought you to write The Death of Stalin?
It's a couple of things. I've been doing Veep for about 4 or 5 years, 4 seasons. I knew that I was going to move on from that. I wanted to do another movie. And I was thinking about doing something about dictators, autocrats, perhaps fictional. And then at the very same time, I got sent the graphic novel, The Death of Stalin. It's a French graphic novel. And the producers of it, Quad, who are based in France and in Canada, said, look, we want to make this as a movie and we think this is right up your street. And I read it and instantly I thought, well, this is it. This is the story I want to tell because this is true. It's absurd. It's crazy. But an awful lot of it is true. And then, and instantly I just, it's about a power struggle, but it's about how people go crazy when they're in fear of their lives, they start doing crazy things. But it's also that thing of how just the crowd just buys into someone, even though that person might be quite mad. This was all pre-Trump, by the way. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. Yes. Not that I'm saying that Trump is in any way crazy, mad, or totalitarian.
Well, I think that is interesting, how you start sort of writing it in a particular context, and that context in the time of release is different. Well, they're not disconnected, but in the Trump era, but also
strange things were happening across Europe. There were, there was nationalism and populism and so on across Europe. So it felt like something. And we'd had, being an Italian as well, I was aware of Berlusconi and his kind of crazy persona, but also one that was in power for a long time.
But also even the Russian context, in the way Russia is being viewed in the West. How do you think this film speaks to those our current times?
Well, unfortunately, all too accurately. I mean, again, I say, we worked on it, and I shot it as a kind of a historical comedy set, in fact, on the basis of truth, but almost as a sort of a warning, as if this happened before, let's not let it happen again. But by the time it came out, it was happening again in a kind of strange kind of way. Yeah. And the film was banned in Russia. And they used the sort of language that, was previously used in the Soviet Union when they were, banning any opponents, and enemies of the people is what Stalin used to call the media, anyone who opposed him. And that's a phrase that's used again. So, it was straight. I mean, the bizarre thing was we were let into Russia to research it. We did a bit of filming there. It was just the moment it came out, they decided to ban it. And I thought, Russia of all countries is very good at finding things online that have been banned. So how they expected to not let anyone see it in Russia, I don't know. And I had a look at someone showed me the figures. It had something like 1.5 million downloads as soon as it was banned. So in many ways, Putin did our kind of our PR for us, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess you there were a couple of screenings there, weren't there, before, and they had to shut it down.
The theater in Moscow went ahead, and the Moscow Times, I remember, went and interviewed people as they were coming out of the screening, and the people were saying, no, this isn't insulting. This is actually quite accurate. A lot of people said, a lot of the Russians who've seen the film have told me two things. They've said it's both true and it's funny. They say it's very funny, but it's true. And we spent a lot of time in the writing of it and the researching of it to make sure that even though we were showing crazy things, we were grounding them in real events, and that we tried to get the background detail as accurate as possible. We never make fun of what happens to the people, the shootings, the gulags, the arrests. That's all shown for what it is, and we don't try and hide that. The craziness is what's going on inside the walls of the Kremlin and the great power struggle between primarily Steve Buscemi as Khrushchev and Simon Russell Beale as Beria, as to who's going to take over, really.
It's an absurd power struggle while this very dark thing is happening.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a big
yeah.
contrast in the film, I guess, in that sense. What do you think? What do you think Putin's biggest problem was with the film?
I think possibly comedy. People. I think politicians don't like. This is why politicians don't like anyone who calls themselves an artist. Why they don't like culture and why they don't like art, because they can't control it. Do you know what I mean? You can control the media. You know, you can ban the media, or you can take over a media company, or you can get your friends and allies in a news network, and you can control the flow of information. But with something that is fictional, an artifact, you know, a painting or a poem or a novel or a film, what you can't control is people's response to that. You can't tell them how to laugh or whether to feel sad or whether to feel angry, you know. And so I think that's why it upsets politicians. That's why they get aggrieved by anything like that, because it's about something that's allowing people. It was interesting. The whole thing about laughter was interesting because we discovered that when Stalin was at the height of his terror and people were being rounded up and taken away to prison, never seen again, for the very sliced reasons, the people in Russia still circulated Stalin joke books, jokes about Stalin, which, you know, if you were found with one in your possession, you could be shot. And yet people still felt the need to be able to make jokes about them, because it's almost like saying, if I can make fun of you, then you haven't got me. You know, you can lock me up, you know, you can take away my livelihood, but if I can still make a joke about you, you haven't got my mind. And that's so comedy is a very powerful thing.
Mm. What did you think the funniest part of the film was?
The funniest part. Well, that's interesting. You know, I mean, there were very set pieces that we knew were funny when we were rehearsing them. There's a scene where they're all on parade round the body of Stalin. The public are going past, and Khrushchev wants to get a message to Beria, but Beria's the other side of Stalin. So he tries to maneuver himself as if it's part of the ceremony, which involves just trying to, you know, trying to swap with someone but make it look ceremonial, and it backfires. And you know, when we were in the rehearsal rooms with, you know, this great cast, you know, it was very funny, and it was funny on the day. But there's one scene right in the middle of the film, and I think it's actually the longest scene in the film, which on paper you wouldn't think would be funny, which is a committee meeting. It's a committee meeting that goes on for about 5 or 6 minutes, and the only action is really these elderly and middle-aged men sitting around a table arguing. But there's a whole lot goes on in that meeting, and also there's the comedy of everyone not quite knowing which way to vote, because everyone knows if they vote the wrong way, if they put their hand up at the wrong time and vote the wrong way, they might get taken out and shot. So everyone is looking to everyone else to see who should put their hand up and who shouldn't put their hand up. And just the physicality of that, of all these very responsible people acting like children, trying not to be caught out, led to one of the funniest scenes in the film.
Mm. Yeah, like a very different context, but that's remind me of some of the Trump meetings that you've seen with his cabinet there.
That's right. The very first. That's right. Because we were editing this scene as Trump got in, and he had that cabinet meeting where the cameras went round all his cabinet ministers, saying, all his cabinet secretaries saying, you know, God has blessed me that I was born to serve under Donald Trump. You know, and it felt very much like, you know, an autocrat allowing his minions to kind of come and worship him for the public. You know, it was a strange sight.
Mm. What is, you said through the rehearsal process, did the sort of script evolve with the rehearsal process like it did with Veep, or did you film it in a different way?
As not as fluid as Veep. I mean, with Veep, we have this standing set and we have the cast, because, you know, if we're shooting episode 7, we have a great idea that might transform something in episode 3, we can go back and do it. But the film, you've got, it's a one-off. And we were in it. We were in hundreds of locations all over the place. Some in Moscow, some in and around London. And what we did do is, I do this with all my films, is we got the cast in and we rehearsed for 2 weeks. You know, especially if you're working with an ensemble, It gives them a chance. I remember Steve Buscemi telling me it gave him a chance not just to get to know his character, but to get to know everyone else's, and that's important. If they're playing these people who have been through the Second World War with each other, have been through shootings and beatings and the revolution and to get that kind of chemistry. It's important, I think, that they've worked with each other prior to the start of the shoot. So what we do is we rehearse, and in the rehearsal process, lots of new ideas come up, and we make sure that there's time to feed those into the filming. Yeah, but it just amazes me that most films involve people just turning up on set and doing it then and there. And what happens if your lead says, I had to think about this, I thought I'd do my entire role like this. Is that all right? And a director goes, well, this bears no relation to what do I do? What do I do? And the shoot is the most expensive part of the whole process. So, you've got 150 people, 200 people standing around ready to shoot. Why have an hour-long conversation about how this line flows and whether there should be another line here? Do all that in a very cheap to book and hire church hall 3 weeks previously.
What was the hardest thing for you in making this film?
I think getting the tone, not going so far down the comedy route that it denigrated the tragedy, but not going so far the kind of gratuitous shock value of what was happening that it undermined the comedy. It was trying to get that tone absolutely right, so that in a perfect world, everything was both funny and tragic at the same time. And in the shoot, I shoot more than I ever need. The first assembly was about 3.5 hours long, because I know that it's in the edit that we'll find the right mix and the right chemistry of those different little moments.
Do you have a favorite line from the film?
Oh heavens, it's been such a long time since.
Yeah.
Such a long time. Yeah. I quite like. I'm off to represent the Red Army at the buffet, which is Zukov, Jason Isaacs as General Zukov, just muscling in on the free food. I quite like. A lot of people quote me that one for some reason. I don't know why. On the page, it's certain lines look quite innocuous on the page, and yet the way someone delivers them, they become the funniest thing there. And I quite like at the beginning Paddy Considine as the head of Radio Moscow, and I'd quite like him shouting to the entire audience, "Don't worry, nobody's going to get killed. This is just a musical emergency," as people are screaming.
What was the most fun thing about the shoot for you?
Well, this group of people, these actors, and they all come from different backgrounds. I kind of like the idea of getting an ensemble who brought different traditions to them. So you had the likes of Paul Whitehouse, who's a big TV comedy star in the UK. You had Steve Buscemi, who does comedy and I wouldn't say tragedy, but does menace really well. Simon Russell Beale, who in the UK is a great stage actor, one of our greatest Shakespearean actors. So Michael Palin, who comes from the Monty Python background, and Andrea Riseborough, who's a sort of chameleon in every part that she does. She's totally unrecognizable and totally different. And I like, assembling this kind of disparate group of people together, and then seeing them, and they actually became the best of friends in the rehearsal process, to the extent that the Stalin's Politburo still met regularly once every couple of months for dinner, long after the filming was over. They would still all meet up and talk about old times and see who was on the list, and see who was next to get shot. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's great. But obviously, this is award season at the moment.
Yeah.
We got a lot of awards coming up. I think one of your last films, In the Loop, was able to get in for best screenwriting at the Oscars. What would awards attention for The Death of Stalin mean?
Well, it would be, you know, terrific. I just, you know, it was a fantastic crew to work with and a fantastic cast, and an amazing score by Christopher Willis, who wrote this pastiche of symphonic music from the 1950s, to the extent that a lot of people thought that we had actually got Shostakovich and Stravinsky and so on. And he's written this amazing original score. And the design and everything, it was a great experience, and I was so happy that it had such a terrific reception. It's a little film. It's, you know, it looks kind of big and epic, but it was a small budget indie film. So for it to get recognition would be great. And I don't really care who or what department. You know, it'd just be nice for some of it to kind of get recognition, I think.
And yeah, with I think something that's interesting about that Death of Stalin, and probably was true of Veep as well, is that it really depicted in such a way the sort of failing upwards and the blend of incompetence and, I don't know, to put it probably a bit nicely, nefariousness of people in power.
Well, when you have, especially if you have like an autocrat at the center of power, what they tend to do is surround themselves with people who are harmless, who present no threat to them. So that's why you get the rising through the levels of responsibility for people who are people who rise to the top, who are genuinely surprised to be there. And that's true. You know, it probably happened in ancient Rome as well as in the Soviet Union and in the world today. That's why, you know, when you watch a politician and you think, how on earth did he get into that position? It's probably because someone higher than them put them there because they didn't feel threatened by them.
We haven't spoken since the one Best Comedy series for your last year on the show. What was that night like?
Well, that was amazing. I mean, we were picking up, you know, Tony Hale got awarded. Julia obviously got her Emmy, and you know, we were very fortunate to get the writing award. So it was like a great night to the extent that after we'd won the writing, I'd completely forgotten that we were up for Best Comedy. You know, I was so excited by the rest of the evening. So that when Mel Brooks of all people walks on and says Veep, and it had genuinely escaped my mind that we were up for Best Comedy. I'd sort of relaxed by then and thought the evening was over because we'd already had these highs. And also I knew it was my last season, and you know, I knew before going into shooting it was my last season. So it felt just the right time. You know, I felt it's very hard to kind of come to another country and make fun of that country's politics and not be hounded out of that country. I don't think we did, you know, if a lot of Americans came over to the UK and made a Brexit comedy, I think we'd be slightly kind of offended, really. But that's the thing I discovered, that America, you know, despite the anti-immigration language used by certain politicians, I find America a very generous, welcoming country. You know, it welcomes you in. And if you have something to say, it hears you out. And that's what I found. And I enjoyed the challenge of coming over, working for HBO, whose programs I adored, and in the space of 4 years building something up to the level it did. That for me was tremendously satisfying, and being able to leave it in good hands and let it be able to carry on with a life of its own. That was all. So it just felt the exact right moment. It was a fantastic evening, and it just felt the absolute right time to kind of bow out.
And it has continued on in success since. By continuing around the Emmys. I have a photo that I took the night of the Emmys, Armando. I was at the HBO party, and this is the table. They've got all these tables with the different shows on them. So there's like there are a couple times for Veep, there's one for Boardwalk Empire, whatever the shows are, and that's the Veep Emmy table.
It's slightly disgusting, isn't it? It's slightly bling.
Like
it looks like Donald Trump's elevator, doesn't it? It looks very, very, very gold. Yes, I remember
another one just at the let's be with it.
Yeah.
And here I am with you and your
Oh,
Emmy.
there we are. Yeah.
There you go. But you've been coming to the Emmys for 3 years, and Veep, Julia won those years, but
we'd always won something, which was very nice.
Yeah.
You know, and there was always every year the kind of the buzz about it's you know your best comedy this year got sort of louder and louder. I knew since year 4 was going to be my last throw at it. I was but the thing with all these is, you know, you try not to get too, you can't get too worked up about it, because then, you know, if you don't get it, you'll end up, you know, being miserable. And that's no way to do comedy. We have a great time doing the show, and they're a great team. That it's loved as a show, you know, is the prize enough, to be honest. But it is, you know, then, you know, I'll admit that, you know, when you get the actual award, that's even better. But it's not, you know, I don't put my. Perhaps it helps that I don't live in LA, so I'm not swept up in that kind of fever for months on end. But anyway, it was a lovely evening. It was a delightful evening.
We'll take it back to the Death of Stalin.
Yeah.
What is the one thing you'd like audiences to take away from the film?
You know, lots of crazy things happen in it, and what's interesting is a lot of people then, you know, go on to Wikipedia and start looking up the events, and then realize how true the film is. And so if they take away, you know, my general rule for watching the Death of Stalin is, if you think it happened, then we probably made it up. If you think that really didn't happen, then it did. That's the kind of rule. I want them to be shocked, amazed, and surprised by how accurate it is as a comedy.
Well, Armando, thanks so much for talking with us today about all this, and all the best of luck for the awards that are coming up, for the Globes and all the Globes, all the Guild things, and the Oscars.
Yes, who knows?
And like it's not like In the Loop got many nominations until the Oscar ones, so you sort of never know.
Yeah, I know. Who knows? So there's no way of predicting anything, really.
Yeah. Other than at goldderby.com, where you can predict all the awards.
No, I think you had us down. I think you had us down for screenplay. Actually, I think you had us as a sort of in the running.
Yeah, I think I've got you in my list, and it's definitely, you can predict Death of Stalin in the Gold Derby's prediction center.